The assembly chamber on Threnody Station was built to hold 10,000 delegates, and on most days its silence was the comfortable kind. The low hum of translation implants, the occasional rustle of ceremonial robes, the sound of a civilization that had stopped being afraid of itself a long time ago. Today the silence was different. Today it had teeth. At the center of the amphitheater, beneath the floating chandelier lights that every species found beautiful for entirely different reasons, stood a single delegate from a world most of the room had never bothered to learn the name of. Her name was Oravanti, and she was Miloan, a species built low and soft, with skin like moss over bark, voice reeds instead of vocal cords, and eyes that had evolved to see starlight, not violence. She was shaking, not from fear of the assembly, from 3 weeks without sleep. "They are not conquering us," she said, and her reed voice cracked on the word conquering, because it implied there was something left worth conquering. "They are unmaking us. Our seed vaults, our memory choirs, our children." Around the great circular table, 40 species looked away, not out of cruelty, out of the particular helplessness that comes from knowing exactly what needs to be said and exactly why no one will say it. The Vrask Dominion had been burning its way across the outer reach for 11 years, 19 systems, 400 million dead by the last honest count, and the count had stopped being honest around System 11. The Vrask did not conquer to rule. They conquered to replace. Every world they took, they scoured clean of whatever had grown there before, and planted their own flag in the ash. The Miloan had never held a weapon in their species' recorded history. Their entire culture was built around cultivation, patience, memory. They were, by every metric the galaxy used to measure strength, defenseless. "Delegate Vanti," said Assembly Speaker Nomu Threll, a four-eyed Satari elder whose voice carried the practiced calm of someone who had said this next sentence 100 times to 100 dying worlds. "We understand the depth of your suffering, but the Vrask fleet numbers in the thousands. Their war-cast warriors are gene-forged for combat from birth. No signatory species of this assembly possesses a military capable of engaging them and surviving. Then what do I tell my people?" Aura's voice broke fully now. "That the assembly's sympathy is very moving, and also they will still be dead by spring?" No one answered, because the truthful answer was yes. It was the Nyralan trade envoy, an insectile being whose 4 thin arms clicked softly when he was nervous, and they were clicking now, who finally said the thing everyone had been carefully not saying for 11 years. "There is one option we have not discussed." The temperature in the room did not literally change, it only felt that way. "What option?" Aura said. "Earth." 3 delegates actually pushed their chairs back from the table, as if the word itself required distance. Every species in this assembly had a story about Earth, and none of the stories agreed on much except the ending. They agreed that Earth was a violent world, a planet where gravity sat heavier than most bodies preferred, where the atmosphere itself was thick with reactive oxygen, where the dominant species had clawed its way to the top of a food chain that had spent 4 billion years trying to kill it. They agreed that humans had reached the stars only 2 centuries ago, and had done something no other species had managed in that time frame. They had gone from stone tools to starships, without ever fully setting down the tools. They agreed that first contact had been civil, almost disappointingly so. Humans traded fairly, followed assembly protocol to the letter, sent scholars instead of soldiers to every cultural exchange. For nearly a decade, humanity had been, by galactic standards, boring. Then the Ashkivi conquered raiders hit a human research outpost in the Perrin Belt, killed 11 researchers, and took 4 more as hostages. The human response had arrived in 6 hours. Not 6 days. 6 hours. Across a distance that should have taken weeks, even at Assembly's fastest-known drive systems. What happened to the Ashkivi raiding fleet was never officially confirmed, because there was nothing left large enough to interview. Survivors, the 2 who existed, described something that did not fight like a military. It fought like a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history being prey and had simply finally gotten tired of it. After that, humanity had gone quiet again. They kept a small, polite presence in assembly affairs, They rarely spoke in session. When they did, their words were precise, courteous, and carried an undertone that made four-armed diplomats reach for water they didn't need. Everyone assumed they were building something back home. No one asked what. "Vanti," said Speaker Threll carefully. "You understand what you would be requesting. Humans do not fight the way this assembly's member species fight. They do not observe combat protocols. They do not limit engagement to declared combatants. When humans decide a conflict requires resolution, they resolve it, completely, and by whatever means the resolution requires." "What does that mean?" Aura asked, though something in her already knew. It was the oldest delegate in the chamber who answered, a wind-thin Alaran elder named Isolt, whose voice had the particular gentleness of someone delivering a warning she wished weren't true. "It means, child, that you will trade one monster for another. The Vrask will stop, I promise you that. But you will spend the rest of your species' history living in a galaxy that knows you were the ones who called the wolves out of the dark to eat the wolves that were already eating you. And people will remember that long after they forget why you had no other choice." Aura Vanti looked around the chamber, at pity in some eyes, fear in others, and in a very few, something that looked almost like curiosity, like watching a coin spin and not yet knowing which face it would land on. She thought of the seed vaults. 12,000 years of cultivated memory, encoded in living plant tissue, now ash on 9 worlds. She thought of the memory choirs, children taught to sing their ancestors' names in sequences so old, the words had no direct translation anymore, silenced on world after world. She thought of the fact that in 6 months, at current rates, there would be no one left to remember that the Maloan had ever existed at all. "I formally petition the human government for intervention," she said. Her voice did not shake this time. "Whatever the cost." The word cost seemed to hang in the recycled air long after she'd said it. Speaker Threll closed all 4 of his eyes for a long moment. "The Assembly will forward your petition to Earth immediately," he said, "and may whatever your people pray to forgive us all for what we are about to do." The human response arrived in 19 hours. 19 hours across a distance the Assembly's own astrogators calculated at roughly 61 light-years. Half the delegates present did not believe the number when it first appeared on the arrival manifest. The other half had simply stopped being surprised by anything humans did, which was its own kind of unsettling. Fleet Commander Aday's course walked into the assembly chamber like a woman entering a room she'd already fully mapped in her head 3 moves ahead. She was of middling height, unremarkable build, dark hair cropped close and practical. Nothing about her appearance suggested violence. That, several delegates would later agree, was precisely what made her terrifying. Behind her came 4 others. A logistics officer with old burn scarring across both forearms, an intelligence specialist whose smile never seemed to arrive at the same time as anything funny, a young medic who kept glancing at the ceiling lights like she was cataloging exits out of pure habit, and a translator who had not blinked, as far as anyone could tell, since stepping off the shuttle. "Speaker Threll," Kors said, with a small, entirely correct bow. "We received the Maloan petition. Where is Delegate Vanti?" Aura stepped forward. Kors turned to look at her, and for a moment Aura had the disquieting sensation of being weighed. Not judged exactly, just measured, the way you might measure a length of rope before deciding whether it would hold. "Tell me what happened," Kors said. Her voice was quiet, not gentle, quiet the way a held breath is quiet. Aura told her. All of it. The seed vaults, the choirs, the processing camps on Millish Prime, where the Vrask had begun sorting Maloan by age and utility. 22 minutes of testimony, and Kors did not move, did not interrupt, barely appeared to breathe. When Aura finished, Kors asked one question. "Are they still taking children?" "Yes." Something happened in Kors's expression that was almost too small to name. The temperature in the room did not change. Several delegates felt cold anyway. She turned to her team without another word. The logistics officer's jaw tightened. The intelligence specialist's smile disappeared entirely. The medic stopped looking at the exits and started looking at Aura instead, with an expression that was almost apologetic. "We'll handle it," Course said. 4 words. No terms. No request for compensation, resource access, territorial concession. None of the standard assembly protocols that governed every other military intervention in recorded history. "Commander," said Speaker Threll, recovering first, "surely Earth requires some form of no, resources at minimum, basing rights. Something to offset the Speaker." Course's voice did not rise. It didn't need to. "There are children being sorted into processing camps by species and utility. We are not going to negotiate a price for stopping that. We're just going to stop it." The Narellan envoy's arms had gone entirely still. "Forgive me, Commander, but the Vrask Dominion controls a war fleet of considerable size. Perhaps a more measured approach, sanctions, diplomatic—" "With respect," Course said, and her smile then was not warm. "Diplomacy works when the other side wants something you can give them that isn't blood. The Vrask want the blood. That's the whole ask. There isn't a version of that conversation that ends with talking." "Then what?" Isolt the Alaran elder asked, though her ancient eyes suggested she already suspected the answer and dreaded confirming it. "Do you intend to do?" "Whatever's necessary," Course said. "We're efficient about it if that helps." It did not visibly help anyone. As Course's team turned to leave, Aura found her voice one last time. "Commander, how long?" Course paused at the threshold. "How long has this been happening?" 11 years. "Then it's already 11 years too long." She didn't look back. "We'll be quick." Part 2. The silence that hunts. The first sign that something had gone wrong for the Vrask Dominion was a supply convoy that simply stopped existing. War Master Gren Vok stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Ashclaw and stared at a tactical display showing empty space where 14 transport vessels should have been. His species did not have a word for confusion in the way most languages meant it. Vrask culture had eliminated ambiguity from its vocabulary generations ago, on the theory that warriors who spoke in certainties fought with more conviction. But he was, for the first time in a long military career, genuinely without a word for what he was looking at. "Report," he said, and his voice carried the particular danger of a predator who has just realized he might not in fact be the largest thing in the water. "Sir, the convoy jumped on schedule. Clean route, no hostile contact logged, no distress beacon triggered. They should have arrived 2 days ago." The comms officer's mandibles clicked with the Vrask equivalent of a swallow. "There's nothing, sir. No wreckage, no signal, nothing." Over the following 3 weeks, nothing became a pattern. Outposts stopped answering hails. Patrol wings launched and did not return. A weapons depot on the edge of Vrask space suffered what the reports carefully called an undetermined structural failure. 3 words doing an enormous amount of work to avoid saying we don't know what happened, and that terrifies us. The Vrask were a species built on the mythology of the glorious duel, honor combat, decisive battles, the clean mathematics of strength against strength. They had built an empire on the principle that the strong simply took what the weak could not defend. It was a philosophy that had worked brutally and efficiently for 200 years. It had never once accounted for an enemy that refused to show up. Squadron leader Iren Thas took his cruiser to investigate a distress call from Outpost Kessel 9. The recording that reached him was 7 seconds of a terrified voice. "Came from nowhere, shields aren't, how are they even—" before it dissolved into static. When his ship arrived, the outpost was intact, fully powered, utterly silent. The boarding party found the entire garrison alive, unconscious, arranged with what felt disturbingly like care along the corridor floors, as if someone had made a point of ensuring no one was hurt in the process of neutralizing them completely. Every weapon system had been disabled with what the ship's engineer called, in a report that would circulate uneasily through the fleet, surgical, almost gentle precision. Every computer core had been copied and wiped in the same motion. And on the command center's main view screen in perfect Vrask battle script, someone had left 4 words. "Stop hunting children. Now." No alien hand had ever written Vrask script with that kind of fluency. The implication that something had been inside their language, their culture, their command structure long enough to write it flawlessly, spread through the fleet faster than any weapon could have. Thassa's ship jumped away within the hour. As his sensors cleared the system, they registered, for exactly 1/2 second, a hull signature. Human manufactured. Close enough that if it had wanted to fire, there would have been no time to notice at all. It had been there the entire time. War Master Vok called an emergency war council. The holographic images of his command staff flickered above the strategy table. The finest military minds the Dominion had produced in a generation, and every one of them looked, for the first time in their careers, like they wanted to be somewhere else. "Report," Vok said. 23 outposts gone dark," said Fleet Marshal Andre, his voice flat with the particular exhaustion of a warrior who had run out of useful things to be angry about. 6 supply convoys lost without a trace. We have not achieved visual confirmation on a single human vessel in active combat. They do not fight us, they simply arrive, disable everything, and vanish. "They are cowards," Vok snarled. "Ghosts and cowards, hiding instead of meeting us blade to blade." "Sir," said Captain Yrsa Dahl, and something in her tone made even Vok go quiet. "With respect, I don't think it's cowardice. I think it's patience. I think they've been in our networks for longer than we've known they existed, and I think everything that's happened so far has been them deciding, one system at a time, whether it was worth their trouble to stop us." The silence that followed had weight to it. "For the first time in 2 centuries, Dahl said quietly, "I think the Dominion is afraid." That night, Vok's own flagship suffered a total systems failure. Every terminal dark simultaneously, engines silent, life support flickering on backup reserves for 3 long hours while 1,200 crew sat in the dark, not knowing if they were about to die. When power returned, a single data packet was waiting in the communications buffer. It contained complete operational schematics for every Vrask fleet currently deployed. Troop positions, supply routes, command hierarchies, information that should have been not merely secret, but architecturally impossible to obtain. Attached to the data was a message. "We know where all of you are. We know what you're planning next. Stop the extermination campaign, or we will end the Dominion's capacity to conduct one. This is the only warning you will receive." Vok stared at the message for a very long time. Around him, his officers scrambled to trace the intrusion, to understand how their most secure systems had been breached so completely. He already suspected the answer, and it was worse than any breach. They hadn't broken in. They had been inside the entire time, watching, cataloging, waiting, while the Dominion spent 11 years believing itself unobserved. For the first time in his military life, Gren Vok understood something he had never needed to understand before. Fear. Part 3. The Weight of Evidence. The interrogation cell aboard the human medical support vessel Solace was nothing like Captain Yrsa Dahl had braced herself for. She had expected pain. Every Vrask combat manual described human interrogation methods in the vaguest, most ominous terms available, which had done nothing except let every soldier's imagination fill in the worst possible blanks. What she found instead was a small, undecorated room, a simple table, and a young human woman who set a cup of water in front of her and spoke fluent, unaccented Vrask. "Lieutenant Marin Osei," the woman said, "I'd like to ask you some questions about troop movements on Milish Prime." Dahl laughed, though it came out brittle. "I will tell you nothing, human. I am a warrior of the Dominion." Osei nodded, unbothered, as if she'd expected exactly that answer, and had already planned 3 responses past it. She set a small projector unit on the table. "That's your right," she said, "but I think you should see something first." The image that bloomed into the air above the table was Milish Prime's capital district, a place Dahl had personally helped garrison 8 months earlier. Where there had been tiered agricultural terraces, there was ash. Where there had been a memory choir hall, a building Dahl remembered specifically being told was a cultural resource facility, low priority, there was a crater. "This was recorded 4 days ago," Osei said quietly. The image shifted. A schoolhouse, its walls painted with what looked like handprints in dozens of small sizes, now collapsed and blackened. A medical dome reduced to twisted framework. A nursery. Dahl recognized the architecture. Every Miller settlement built one, now simply gone. Standard suppression protocol, Dahl said, though the words tasted wrong in her mouth even as she said them. O.C. touched the projector again. Bodies. Miller civilians, their bark-toned skin gone gray in death. Small ones, curled where they'd fallen while running. An adult Dahl guessed was elderly, positioned as though they'd tried in their final moment to shield a child beneath them. 9,400 confirmed dead in this district alone, in a single day, Osei said. Care to revise your answer? Dahl's jaw worked, but nothing came out. She had told herself for 11 years that this was war, that casualties were the cost of victory, that the weak yielded to the strong because that was simply the mathematics of survival. It had always sounded clean in the abstract. It looked considerably less clean laid out in 100 small bodies. They resisted, she said, weaker than she meant to. Captain. Osei's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes sharpened into a different kind of dangerous. The Miller have no standing military, no weapons doctrine. Their idea of resistance is composing a memorial song for the people you kill. She touched the projector once more. A data slate appeared displaying a handwritten operational order. Dahl's own handwriting from 6 months prior, specifying cultural infrastructure as priority elimination targets to accelerate population compliance. These are your orders, aren't they? Dahl said nothing. The silence answered for her. Osei leaned back. My commanding officer has a saying. When you go looking for monsters, be careful you don't become one on the way. I don't think the Dominion ever went looking for monsters, Captain. I think you just skipped straight to becoming one. For the next hour, Osei laid out evidence gathered from across Dominion territory, not merely engagements and casualties, but the sorting camps, the child labor allocations disguised as resource integration, the systematic destruction of every Miller seed vault and archive on 19 worlds. It was not conquest. It had never been conquest. It was erasure, executed with bureaucratic thoroughness. Why are you showing me this? Dahl finally asked, and for the first time her voice held something other than defiance. Because I want you to understand exactly why we're going to end the Dominion's ability to do it again, Osei said. Not for territory, not for tribute. Because you built a machine for erasing people, and we happen to be very good at dismantling those. While Dahl sat with the weight of that evidence settling into her, a very different scene was unfolding on the liberated surface of Milish Prime. Medical Officer Thomas Reyes knelt in the rubble of what had once been a nursery, carefully cleaning a wound on the arm of a small Miller child who had been hiding in a collapsed maintenance duct for 6 days. His hands that 4 days earlier had helped coordinate a strike that disabled an entire Dominion garrison without a single fatality on either side, moved now with a gentleness that seemed almost incongruous. You're safe, he said, in careful, heavily accented Miller. No one is going to hurt you anymore. The child looked up at him with wide, star-adapted eyes, full of the particular terror of someone who had grown up hearing that humans were the true monster, hiding behind the Dominion's monster. But his hands were careful, and his voice, however clumsy the accent, was kind. My mother, she whispered. Reyes's expression fell. I'm sorry, little one, she's gone. But you are not alone. Not anymore. All across the liberated worlds, the same pattern repeated. Human engineers worked around clock cycles to restore power grids and water reclamation. Human logisticians studied Miller dietary requirements down to the trace mineral to ensure emergency rations wouldn't cause harm. Soldiers who had, days earlier, disassembled entire war fleets without visible emotion now carried elderly Miller out of unstable structures with what looked almost like reverence. Oravanti found Commander Korse standing in the ruins of the Great Archive on Milish Prime, watching a team of human technicians carefully extract a memory seed capsule from beneath collapsed stone. The technicians handled the scorched capsule like it was made of glass. Why are you doing this? Ora asked. The rebuilding. The archives. You could have simply stopped the Dominion and left. Because it matters, Kors said without looking up from the recovery effort. Your history, your memory choirs, your seed vaults. The Dominion didn't destroy those by accident, delegate. They destroyed them because they understood something most conquerors eventually learn. You don't erase a people by killing their bodies. You erase them by killing what they remember. A young technician approached, carrying a fire-warped Millewan memory sculpture, a rendering of a Millewan family, root systems intertwined in a shape meant to represent permanence, continuity, unbroken generational memory. Commander, we found this in the sub-level vault. We think we can restore most of it. Kors took the sculpture in hands that 4 days prior had authorized the disabling of an entire dreadnought's weapon systems in 11 seconds. She held it now like it might shatter from breath alone. Make it whole again, she said. These people deserve to have their memory back. Word of these small kindnesses spread through the assembly faster than any battle report. Species that had braced for humanity to extract tribute, territory, gratitude at minimum, instead heard reports of human engineers spending their own resources rebuilding archives on a world most of them had never visited before. The Norellan trade envoy sent a private communique to his government that would be quietly studied by diplomats for the next generation. I do not think we understood humans at all, it read. They are not the conquerors we feared. They are something else. Guardians, perhaps, though even that word feels too small. Perhaps the clearest evidence came 3 weeks into the liberation effort, when a group of Millewan children, orphaned, some of them, by the very war that had ended in their rescue, approached a squad of human soldiers resting after a 30-hour rescue rotation. The children carried hand-drawn images, humans and Millewan standing together beneath a shared sun, root hands intertwined with human fingers. At the bottom of each drawing, in careful, newly learned assembly script, were 2 words. Thank you. The soldiers, who had spent 3 weeks quietly dismantling an empire without so much as raising their voices, sat down in the rubble of an alien world and wept. Part 4. What the monsters left behind. The surrender arrived on what the Vrask calendar recorded simply as the 402nd day of the Milish campaign, though by then, no one in the Dominion's command structure was still counting in terms of campaign. War Master Vox stood in the ruins of his command bunker on the Dominion homeworld, surrounded by the wreckage of an empire that had believed itself unbreakable for 2 centuries. His fleets were gone, not destroyed in glorious battle, but disassembled, ship by ship, system by system, by an enemy that had never once given them the honor duel their entire culture had been built to expect. His armies had nowhere left to march. But it was not the military collapse that finally broke him. It was the broadcast. At a single designated hour, every communication channel across Dominion space carried the same transmission simultaneously. A compilation, meticulously documented, of everything the Dominion's war machine had done across 19 conquered systems. The processing camps, the mass graves, the systematic destruction of every cultural archive the Dominion had encountered. All of it, presented without embellishment, without rhetoric, simply laid bare in its own bureaucratic paper trail. At the end, a single line of text displayed in every Dominion citizen's own language simultaneously. This ends today. Not a demand, not an invitation to negotiate, a statement of settled fact. Within hours, Dominion garrisons across 19 systems began surrendering. Not to the humans specifically, and not out of fear of further military losses, but because ordinary Dominion citizens, watching their own empire's actions laid out plainly for the first time in 200 years, no longer recognized what they were fighting for. Vok activated his personal channel one final time. This is War Master Gren Vok. To the Human Command Authority, I surrender all Dominion forces, unconditionally. The reply came back immediately in flawless Vrask. Surrender accepted. Your people will be treated with dignity, the same dignity your empire denied to others. The formal ceremony was held aboard Threnody Station, in the same chamber where Ora Vanti had once stood shaking, asking a room full of frightened diplomats to gamble her people's future on a species no one fully understood. Delegates from across the assembly had gathered to witness the quiet, almost anticlimactic end of an empire that had terrorized the outer reach for over a decade. Commander Korse stood at the podium in the same unremarkable uniform she'd worn on arrival, looking, as ever, entirely too ordinary for someone who had just overseen the systematic dismantling of a galactic power in under 3 months. Behind her, the human fleet held formation in the void beyond the station's viewport. Sleek, quiet ships that had proven considerably more dangerous than anyone had dared imagine, and were now simply waiting to go home. Ora Vanti approached the podium carrying a case of data crystals. "Commander Korse," she said, her voice steady in a way it had not been months earlier. "The Maloan Assembly offers Earth territorial administration rights over 11 recovered systems, resource extraction agreements across 30 worlds, and permanent preferential trade status. It is an inadequate payment for what your people have done for mine, but it is everything we have." The chamber fell silent. This, everyone understood, was the moment the true nature of humanity's intentions would finally reveal itself. The moment the quiet, efficient monsters who had unmade an empire without ceremony would name their price. Korse looked at the offered data crystals for a long moment. Then she smiled, small and tired. "We don't want your worlds, delegate," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "We came because people were being erased, and we were positioned to stop it. That's the whole of it." The words landed on the assembly like a physical weight. Several delegates actually leaned back in their seats as though the statement itself required distance. "Surely you want something," Speaker Threll managed. "Your military expenditure alone across this campaign must have been immense. Your personnel—" "Our ships are going home," Korse said gently. "Our medical teams are already transitioning rebuilding operations to Maloan administration. As for the expenditure, we consider it appropriately spent." The Nyrellan envoy found his voice first, arms trembling with the particular agitation of a being confronting something entirely outside its worldview. "Commander, forgive my confusion, but you have just demonstrated unambiguously that humanity possesses the most capable military force in this assembly's known space. You could claim any territory, dictate any trade agreement, and no power represented in this chamber could meaningfully oppose you. Why walk away from that?" Korse was quiet for a moment, studying the sea of alien faces watching her, waiting. "Because we're not the Dominion," she said finally. "Power was never supposed to be about what you can take. It's about what you're willing to protect." The Alaran elder Isolt raised one thin hand. "Commander Korse, may I ask a question that has troubled my people since this began? We named you monsters before we understood you. We feared you would prove as terrible as the empire you were sent to stop. Were we wrong?" Korse's smile turned sharp at the edges, though not unkindly. "No," she said. "You weren't wrong. We are monsters, but there are different kinds." She gestured toward the empty space where the Dominion fleet had once loomed. "The Vrask were monsters that fed on the defenseless. They took what they wanted and erased whatever they couldn't use. That's one kind of monster, a parasite wearing an empire's uniform." Her gaze swept the chamber, and for a moment every delegate present felt, however briefly, the full weight of humanity's attention resting on them. "We're monsters too," she said. "But we're the kind that hunts the other kind." The Nyrellan envoy's arms had gone entirely still. "What does that mean for the rest of us?" "It means," Korse said, "that as long as there are people who cannot defend themselves and someone decides that's an opportunity instead of a tragedy, we'll be watching. We won't take your worlds, we won't dictate your laws. But if another empire decides that strength is permission, if anyone decides the helpless exist to be used—" She paused, and the silence in the chamber was absolute. "They'll have to go through us first." In the weeks that followed, 3 words began appearing in assembly-wide communications with increasing frequency. Pirates heard them and dispersed. Slave traders heard them and quietly released their cargo before anyone needed to ask twice. Petty tyrants heard them murmured in council chambers and remembered suddenly that there existed worse fates than losing an argument. Call the humans. It was not quite a threat. It was not quite a promise. It existed somewhere in the space between both. 3 words carrying the full weight of everything that had happened to the Vrask Dominion, spoken quietly enough that everyone understood exactly how loud it really was. The galaxy had learned, slowly and at considerable cost, that monsters were real. It had also learned, almost as an afterthought, that some monsters had simply decided which side they were going to stand on. Aboard her flagship, watching trade convoys move safely through lanes that had once been Dominion hunting grounds, Commander Aday's course allowed herself a rare moment of stillness. Her reflection in the viewport showed tired eyes, the particular exhaustion of someone who had spent months holding a very large and very heavy line, and beneath it, something that might have been quiet satisfaction. "Ma'am," her communications officer said. "Distress signal from the Perrin corridor. Raiders hitting a refugee convoy." Course didn't hesitate. "Set a course," she said. "Full speed." As her ship turned toward the next crisis waiting somewhere in the dark, she allowed herself the smallest smile. They were monsters. The galaxy had always been right about that much, but they were the right kind. And for now, at least, the universe was a little safer for it.